In the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, life moved at its own unhurried pace. The streets were lined with cozy houses, family-owned shops, and towering trees that shaded everything in a warm, golden glow during sunset. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, at least by face, and where nothing much ever seemed to happen. But beneath this calm surface there lived a woman whose story would soon become the talk of the entire town. Her name was Maria Thompson, and she wasn't like anyone else in Willow Creek. Not because she stood out, but because she blended so perfectly into the fabric of everyday life. To most people, Maria appeared to be just another ordinary resident. Quiet, polite, and unassuming. She worked as a librarian at the local public library, spending her days surrounded by shelves stacked high with books. Kids loved her for helping them find exciting stories, while adults appreciated her patience when they needed help researching something obscure. Maria's routine rarely changed. Every morning she'd walk to work, greeting neighbors along the way. At the library, she'd organize books, assist visitors, and occasionally sip tea during her break. Her evenings were spent reading or practicing hobbies she kept mostly to herself. Few people guessed what lay hidden behind her soft smile and gentle demeanor, something extraordinary, forged over years of dedication and discipline. What no one realized was that Maria had a secret. Years ago, as a young girl growing up in a tougher neighborhood than Willow Creek, she'd faced challenges far greater than anyone could imagine. Bullies had targeted her relentlessly, making her childhood miserable. One day, desperate for a way to defend herself, she stumbled upon a local karate class. At first, it was just about learning how to protect herself from harm, but over time, it became so much more. Karate taught Maria not only physical strength, but also mental resilience. It gave her confidence, focus, and a deep sense of respect for herself and others. By the age of 25, after nearly 2 decades of rigorous training, she earned her black belt in Shotokan karate. Yet despite this incredible achievement, Maria never flaunted her skills. Instead, she chose to keep them private, viewing karate as a personal journey rather than a badge of honor. Outside of her weekly visits to a dojo located in a nearby town, she rarely mentioned it to anyone. Life continued peacefully for Maria until one fateful week when 3 unfamiliar faces began showing up at the library. These weren't your average patrons looking for books or answers. They were troublemakers. Loud, rude, and disrespectful, they disrupted the usually serene atmosphere of the library. They laughed too loudly, made inappropriate comments, and generally made everyone uncomfortable. Some visitors stopped coming altogether, fearing confrontation. Others simply avoided the men, hoping to stay under their radar. At first, Maria tried to ignore them. She reminded herself that libraries were meant to be safe spaces for everyone, even those who didn't always behave well. But ignoring the problem only made things worse. The leader of the group, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms, began singling her out. His name was Ray, and he seemed to take pleasure in mocking her reserved nature. He called her names, teased her for being too weak to stand up for herself, and often leaned across the counter, invading her personal space. One afternoon, Ray crossed a line. As Maria quietly shelved books in a corner aisle, he appeared suddenly, blocking her path. Leering down at her, he sneered, "You think you're better than us? You don't belong here." Maria froze for a moment, startled by his aggression. But then she remembered all those hours on the mat, all the lessons she'd learned about staying calm under pressure. Slowly, deliberately, she met his gaze without flinching. Ray grew angrier when she refused to respond. In a fit of frustration, he grabbed her arm tightly, demanding she say something. That's when something inside Maria clicked. Without hesitation, she used a basic wrist release technique she'd practiced countless times. With a quick twist, she freed herself from his grip and stepped back, her heart pounding but her expression calm. Ray stumbled backward, stunned by her reaction. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, without uttering a single word, Maria turned and walked away, leaving him glaring after her. Little did Maria know this encounter was only the beginning. Ray and his friends weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone they saw as harmless. Their egos bruised, they decided to make Maria pay for embarrassing them. What they didn't realize, however, and what would soon change everything, was that Maria wasn't as defenseless as she seemed. After that tense encounter in the library aisle, Maria hoped things would settle down. She figured Ray and his friends might back off now that she'd shown she wasn't someone to be pushed around easily. But instead of retreating, they grew bolder and more dangerous. Their behavior escalated quickly, turning what had been an uncomfortable situation into something far more menacing. The next few days were unbearable for Maria and everyone else at the library. Ray and his crew started showing up almost daily, making a point to disrupt the peace as much as possible. They knocked over book displays, scattering novels and magazines across the floor just for fun. They laughed loudly in quiet corners where students were trying to study, drowning out their concentration with crude jokes and insults. It felt like they were deliberately trying to make the library uninhabitable, and Maria couldn't help but feel it was all aimed at her. Things got worse when they began targeting her directly. One afternoon, while Maria was helping an elderly man find a gardening book, Ray strolled by and muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Still here, huh? Thought you'd have run away by now." His words dripped with mockery, and his two buddies snickered behind him. Maria bit her lip, pretending not to notice, but her hands trembled slightly as she handed the book to the older gentleman. Another time, Ray blocked her path near the circulation desk, leaning against it with a smug grin on his face. "You're tougher than you look," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't mean it as a compliment. "But toughness only gets you so far, sweetheart." He tapped the counter menacingly before walking away, leaving Maria standing there, her heart racing despite her outward calm. What made it even harder was that no one stepped in to stop them. Not the patrons, not the other staff members, and certainly not Ray's friends who seemed content to egg him on. Some visitors avoided coming to the library altogether, fearing they'd become collateral damage in whatever game Ray was playing. Others simply kept their heads down, hoping to stay invisible. The once welcoming atmosphere of the library had turned cold and tense, and Maria knew she was running out of options. One evening, as Maria locked up after closing hours, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. Her car, parked under a street lamp in the nearly empty lot, had been vandalized. Someone had scratched deep lines into the driver's side door, spelling out crude words she didn't want to read twice. Her stomach sank as she stared at the damage, anger and fear swirling inside her. This wasn't just about intimidating her anymore, it was personal. Maria reported the incident to the police the next day, providing details about Ray and his gang. But without concrete evidence or witnesses willing to testify, there wasn't much law enforcement could do. "Keep documenting everything," the officer advised her kindly. "Write down dates, times, and descriptions. If it happens again, call us immediately." Though his words were meant to reassure her, Maria left, the station feeling frustrated and alone. How could she prove what was happening when no one else wanted to get involved? That night, unable to sleep, Maria decided to visit her sensei at the dojo where she trained. Master Takahashi was a wise and patient man who had taught her not only how to fight but also how to think clearly in difficult situations. As she walked into the dimly lit training hall, he looked up from adjusting some mats and greeted her warmly. "Something's bothering you," he said simply, reading her expression with ease. Maria nodded, sitting cross-legged on the mat as she poured out her frustrations. She told him about Ray, the bullying, the vandalism, and the growing sense of helplessness she felt. When she finished, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, not because she was weak, but because the weight of it all finally caught up with her. Master Takahashi listened quietly, nodding thoughtfully. When she was done, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Violence is never the first answer," he reminded her gently. "But sometimes protecting yourself means drawing a line and refusing to let others step over it. You've trained hard for years, and your skills are a tool, a gift. Use them wisely." His words gave Maria strength, but they also came with a warning. Preparation mattered. Over the next several days, she threw herself into her training with renewed focus. She practiced footwork drills until her legs burned, honed her striking techniques until her knuckles ached, and worked on situational awareness exercises designed to keep her sharp in unpredictable scenarios. Each session left her exhausted but determined. She didn't know exactly what Ray and his friends had planned next, but she vowed to be ready for anything. Despite her resolve, Maria couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. Every trip to the library felt heavier than the last, every glance over her shoulder more frequent. She tried to reassure herself that she was doing everything she could, reporting incidents, staying vigilant, preparing physically, but part of her wondered if it would ever be enough. Still, she refused to give in to fear. She reminded herself why she'd taken up karate in the first place, to stand tall when life pushed her down, to protect not just herself, but others who couldn't protect themselves. Little did Maria know, her moment of truth was closer than she thought. Ray and his gang weren't done with her yet, and their next move would force her to decide once and for all whether she was truly ready to face them head-on. The tension in Willow Creek's library had reached a breaking point. Maria could feel it in the air every time she stepped through the doors. The once peaceful space now buzzed with unease, like a storm cloud hanging low and ready to burst. Ray and his gang were becoming bolder by the day, their actions growing more aggressive and unpredictable. It was clear they weren't going to back down anytime soon, and neither was Maria. One afternoon, as Maria tidied up the reading area, she overheard one of the regular patrons whispering nervously to another. "I'm not coming here anymore," the woman said, clutching her bag tightly. "It's just not safe." Her voice trembled, and Maria felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't what the library was supposed to be, a place where people felt threatened or afraid. But how could she fix it? Reporting the incidents hadn't worked, and avoiding the problem wasn't an option either. She knew deep down that ignoring Ray's behavior would only make things worse, for herself and for everyone else who relied on the library as a sanctuary. That evening, after closing time, Maria stayed late to work on some paperwork. As she sat at her desk, pen in hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The building was quiet except for the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above. Every so often she'd glance toward the windows, half expecting to see shadows moving outside. When she finally decided to leave, she grabbed her jacket and headed for the exit, locking the door behind her carefully. But as she walked to her car, parked under the same street lamp as before, her heart sank. Someone had slashed one of her tires. The rubber sagged lifelessly against the rim, and shards of glass glinted ominously on the ground nearby. Maria clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a message. They wanted her to know they were watching, waiting, testing her limits. Instead of panicking, Maria took a deep breath. She reminded herself of what Master Takahashi had told her. Preparation mattered. Without hesitation, she called roadside assistance and waited patiently for help to arrive. While she stood there, arms crossed against the chilly night air, she replayed scenarios in her mind. What if they confronted her again? What if next time, it wasn't just her car they targeted? She needed to be ready for whatever came her way. Over the next few days, Maria made subtle changes to her routine. She started parking farther away from the library, choosing spots closer to other cars in the lot. She kept her phone charged and within reach at all times, saving emergency numbers on speed dial. And during her training sessions at the dojo, she focused even harder on techniques designed for real-world situations. Master Takahashi noticed her intensity and nodded approvingly. "You're thinking ahead," he said one evening as they practiced blocking drills. "Good. Anticipation is key." Despite her efforts, the harassment continued. One morning, Maria arrived at work to find a note taped to the library's front door. The words scrawled across it sent chills down her spine. "Stay out of our way." Though unsigned, she knew exactly who it was from. Shaking slightly but refusing to let fear take hold, she tore the note down and locked it in her desk drawer. Later, she reported it to the police, though she doubted anything would come of it. Still, documenting everything gave her a small sense of control in an otherwise chaotic situation. What worried Maria most, however, wasn't the threats themselves. It was the effect they were having on others. A young mother who frequented the library with her toddler stopped coming altogether, too frightened to bring her child into such a hostile environment. Even longtime patrons avoided sitting near the windows, fearful of being seen by Ray and his gang. The library, once a haven of learning and connection, had become a place of anxiety and mistrust. Maria couldn't stand idly by while her community suffered. One afternoon, she approached the library director, a kind older man named Mr. Peterson, and shared her concerns. "We can't let them win," she said firmly. "If we don't do something, they'll drive everyone away, including us." Mr. Peterson sighed, rubbing his temples. He wanted to help, but like everyone else, he feared retaliation. "Be careful, Maria," he warned gently. "These aren't people you want to provoke." Though disappointed by his lack of action, Maria understood his hesitation. Fear was powerful. It silenced voices, paralyzed decision-making, and allowed bullies to thrive unchecked. But Maria refused to let fear dictate her choices. Instead, she resolved to lead by example, showing others that standing up didn't mean picking fights. It meant refusing to back down when justice was at stake. Her determination only grew stronger when Ray and his crew escalated their tactics yet again. Late one rainy Tuesday evening, as Maria prepared to close the library, she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the empty halls. At first, she thought it might be a straggling patron, but when she turned the corner, her stomach dropped. There they were, Ray and his two cronies, drenched from the storm and radiating hostility. They blocked both exits, trapping Maria and a young mother who had been browsing picture books with her toddler. The child clung to his mother's leg, wide-eyed and trembling, while the woman tried unsuccessfully to shield him from view. Maria stepped forward instinctively, positioning herself between the frightened pair and the intruders. Ray smirked, clearly enjoying the power he held over them. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little audience tonight," he sneered, nodding toward the mother and child. Then, turning his attention to Maria, he added, "And you've been pushing your luck, lady. Now it's time to teach you a lesson." Maria's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She glanced briefly at the young mother, silently urging her to stay still and quiet. Then, fixing her gaze on Ray, she spoke in a voice steadier than she felt. "Leave now," she said firmly. "This isn't going to end well for you." For a moment, Ray hesitated, unsure whether to laugh or lash out. But then, emboldened by his friend's snickers, he lunged at her, aiming to grab her arm. What happened next shocked everyone, including Ray himself. Maria reacted instantly, sidestepping his clumsy attack with precision honed from years of practice. Before he could recover, she delivered a sharp strike to his solar plexus, knocking the wind out of him. Gasping for air, Ray stumbled backward, clutching his chest in shock. His friends froze, unsure what to do, giving Maria just enough time to pivot and sweep one of them off his feet with a swift leg movement. The third man, visibly unnerved, backed away toward the door, muttering under his breath. As Ray struggled to regain his composure, he stared at Maria, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. Who are you?" he stammered, finally, realizing he'd severely underestimated her. Maria straightened up, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm someone who doesn't tolerate bullies," she replied coolly. With that, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911, keeping a watchful eye on the trio until the authorities arrived. Though the confrontation ended quickly, its impact rippled far beyond those tense moments in the library. For Maria, it was proof that preparation and courage could overcome fear. For Ray and his gang, it was a wake-up call, one they wouldn't soon forget. And for the rest of Willow Creek, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where bravery triumphed over intimidation, and strength came not from aggression but from standing up for what was right. The rain hammered against the library windows as Maria stood her ground, her chest rising and falling with each controlled breath. The room was eerily quiet, except for the sound of water dripping from Ray's soaked jacket onto the tiled floor. His two friends, now visibly shaken, hovered near the exit, unsure whether to run or retaliate. One of them muttered under his breath, "This is messed up," while the other just stared at Maria, wide-eyed, as if seeing her for the first time. Ray, still doubled over and gasping for air, glared at her through narrowed eyes. He couldn't believe what had just happened. A woman he'd dismissed as weak, someone he thought he could intimidate without consequence, had turned the tables on him in seconds. His pride stung more than his ribs, and anger burned hot in his veins. But even in his rage, there was a flicker of fear, a realization that he'd underestimated her completely. Maria didn't waste time gloating. She knew better than to let her guard down, no matter how much control she seemed to have regained. Keeping one eye on Ray and his gang, she dialed 911 with steady hands. Her voice was calm but firm as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. 3 men refusing to leave the premises, threatening behavior, an attempted assault. She gave the address clearly, then hung up and slipped her phone into her pocket. "You're making a big mistake," Ray growled, finally managing to straighten up. His face was flushed, partly from embarrassment, partly from the lingering pain of Maria's strike. "You don't know who you're messing with." Maria crossed her arms, her stance relaxed but ready. "Actually," she said coolly, "I think I do. And trust me, this isn't going to end well for you." Her words carried weight, not because they were loud or aggressive, but because they were spoken with absolute certainty. Deep down, Ray must have known she was right. For all his bluster, he wasn't used to being challenged like this. Most people back down when confronted by someone like him. But Maria wasn't most people. The young mother, clutching her toddler, tightly whispered a trembling thank you from behind Maria. It was barely audible, but it meant everything to her. In that moment, Maria felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't just about protecting herself, it was about standing up for everyone who couldn't, or wouldn't, stand up for themselves. She had trained for years to defend not only her body, but also her values, and now those skills were being put to their ultimate test. Minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the stormy night. Red and blue lights flashed through the rain-streaked windows as police cars pulled into the parking lot. Ray's gang exchanged nervous glances, their bravado crumbling under the weight of impending consequences. One of them bolted for the door, only to be intercepted by officers moments later. The second followed suit, tripping over his own feet in his haste to escape. Ray, however, stayed rooted to the spot, glaring daggers at Maria. When the officers entered the library, Maria quickly explained what had happened, pointing out the damage to her car earlier in the week and sharing details about the escalating harassment. She handed over the threatening note she'd found taped to the door, along with notes she'd been keeping since the trouble began. The young mother stepped forward too, tearfully recounting how unsafe she'd felt coming to the library lately. Her testimony added another layer of gravity to the situation, painting a clear picture of the chaos Ray and his crew had caused. As the officers led Ray and his friends away in handcuffs, Ray shot one last venomous look at Maria. "This isn't over," he spat, though his voice lacked conviction. Maria didn't respond. Instead, she watched silently as they disappeared into the backseat of a squad car, the rain washing away their footprints on the pavement outside. Once the commotion died down, Maria finally allowed herself to exhale. Her legs felt shaky, her heart still racing, but she forced herself to focus on the present moment. Turning to the young mother and her child, she offered a small, reassuring smile. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she repeated, hugging her son closer. "If it weren't for you—" Maria shook her head gently. "It's not just me. We all deserve to feel safe here. That's why I did it." After ensuring the mother and child got home safely, Maria locked up the library and walked to her car. Despite the slashed tire, which would need replacing, she felt a strange sense of peace. For weeks she'd carried the weight of fear and frustration, wondering if things would ever improve. Now, though the battle wasn't entirely won, she knew she'd taken a crucial step toward reclaiming her space and her community's trust. Word spread quickly around Willow Creek. By morning, nearly everyone in town had heard about what happened at the library. Some praised Maria as a hero, marveling at her bravery and skill. Others expressed relief that Ray and his gang might finally face justice. Even Mr. Peterson, the library director, admitted he'd underestimated Maria's determination. "I should have listened to you sooner," he told her apologetically. "You've done something remarkable." But Maria didn't want recognition. When reporters showed up asking for interviews, she politely declined. "I'm just doing my job," she told them simply. "This library belongs to everyone, and I won't let anyone take that away." What surprised her most, though, was the reaction from the community itself. Over the next few days, patrons returned to the library in droves. Parents brought their children, students came to study, and elderly visitors resumed their daily routines. The atmosphere slowly shifted back to its former warmth, thanks in large part to Maria's actions. People greeted her with smiles and gratitude, some even bringing homemade cookies or handwritten notes to express their appreciation. Despite the newfound admiration, Maria remained humble. She continued her work as usual, shelving books, helping visitors, and maintaining the library's welcoming environment. But privately, she reflected on how much had changed, not just in the world around her, but within herself. Facing Ray had tested her courage in ways she hadn't anticipated, forcing her to confront fears she'd buried long ago. Through it, all she'd discovered a deeper strength, one rooted not in aggression but in resilience and compassion. Meanwhile, Ray and his gang faced serious charges. Their arrest marked the beginning of accountability for months of unchecked behavior. During court proceedings, Ray initially tried to play the victim, claiming Maria had attacked him unprovoked. But evidence, including witness testimonies, security footage from nearby businesses, and Maria's meticulous documentation, proved otherwise. Faced with overwhelming proof, Ray eventually admitted guilt, though grudgingly. His friends followed suit, each expressing varying degrees of remorse. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. "Bullying has no place in our society," he declared sternly. "It destroys lives and communities. If anything positive comes from this case, let it serve as a reminder that actions have consequences." For Maria, the trial was bittersweet. On one hand, she was glad justice was served. On the other, she couldn't help but feel sadness for Ray and his gang. They were products of their choices, yes, but also of circumstances that had likely shaped them long before they ever set foot in her library. Still, she reminded herself that holding them accountable wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting others from harm. In the weeks that followed, life in Willow Creek began to heal. The library thrived once again, its shelves bustling with activity. Visitors lingered longer, chatting animatedly in corners and laughing over shared stories. Even the weather seemed to cooperate, trading gray skies for sunshine that streamed through the windows. Maria, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. Inspired by the support she'd received, she decided to share her knowledge with others. With Master Takahashi's blessing, she started teaching free self-defense classes at the local community center. At first, attendance was modest, a handful of curious teenagers and a few nervous adults. But word of mouth spread, and soon the sessions filled up with eager participants of all ages. Through these classes, Maria hoped to empower others the way karate had empowered her. She taught not only physical techniques but also mental strategies, how to stay calm under pressure, how to assess threats, and most importantly, how to stand firm without resorting to violence unless absolutely necessary. Her lessons resonated deeply, especially among women and children who often felt vulnerable in unsafe situations. One evening, after wrapping up a particularly lively session, Maria sat on the edge of the mat, sipping water and watching her students practice. Master Takahashi joined her, smiling proudly. "You've come a long way," he said, "not just as a martial artist, but as a person." Maria smiled back, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance," she replied. "And theirs," she added, nodding toward the group practicing nearby. Sometimes standing up isn't just about fighting, it's about inspiring others to do the same. She packed up her gear and headed home. Maria couldn't help but feel hopeful. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she knew she'd made a difference, not just in her own life, but in the lives of those around her. And sometimes, that was enough. The ripple effects of that rainy Tuesday night at the library stretched far beyond what anyone in Willow Creek could have imagined. What started as a single act of defiance by Maria soon grew into something much bigger, a movement, almost, that touched every corner of the town. For weeks after the incident, people couldn't stop talking about it. Conversations buzzed in coffee shops, grocery stores, and even during Sunday morning church services. Everyone had an opinion, but most agreed on one thing. Maria wasn't just a librarian anymore. She was a symbol of courage and resilience. At first, Maria tried to downplay her role in what happened. When neighbors stopped her on the street to thank her or express admiration, she'd simply shrug and say, "I was just doing what needed to be done." But no matter how modest she remained, the impact of her actions became undeniable. Slowly, the atmosphere in Willow Creek began to shift. People who had once avoided conflict now found themselves speaking up when they saw injustice. Kids who used to cower under bullies' taunts learned to stand taller. And the library, it transformed back into the vibrant, welcoming space it had always meant to be. Maria's self-defense classes played a big part in this change. Word spread quickly about the free sessions she offered at the community center, drawing crowds that surprised even her. At first, attendees came out of curiosity, wanting to meet the woman who had stood up to Ray, but they stayed because of what she taught them. Her lessons weren't just about punches and kicks. They were about confidence, awareness, and respect. She shared stories from her own life, explaining how karate had helped her overcome fear and find strength she didn't know she had. One evening, a young girl named Lily approached Maria after class, clutching a notebook tightly to her chest. "Miss Maria," she said shyly, "can I ask you something?" Maria knelt down so she could look the girl in the eye. "Of course," she replied warmly. Lily hesitated before blurting out, "Do you think I could be brave like you someday?" Maria's heart softened. She remembered being that age, feeling powerless against bullies who seemed larger than life. "Bravery isn't about never being scared," she explained gently. "It's about facing your fears anyway. You're already brave for asking me this question." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, but she nodded determinedly. From that day forward, she attended every session, practicing diligently and encouraging others to join her. Watching her grow more confident week by week filled Maria with pride. If she could help even one person feel stronger and safer, all her efforts would be worth it. Meanwhile, news of Maria's heroics reached farther than she expected. A local newspaper ran a feature article titled, "The Librarian Who Fought Back," which highlighted not only the confrontation with Ray, but also her ongoing work teaching self-defense. The piece struck a chord with readers, sparking conversations about bullying, safety, and empowerment. Letters poured in from people across the region, sharing their own struggles and thanking Maria for inspiring them. Some wrote about overcoming abuse, while others described standing up to workplace harassment. Each letter reinforced the idea that courage was contagious, and Maria had become its unlikely torchbearer. But fame wasn't something Maria sought or enjoyed. While she appreciated the support, she worried about losing sight of why she'd stepped forward in the first place. One afternoon, as she sorted through yet another stack of fan mail, Master Takahashi visited her at home. He found her sitting at the kitchen table looking overwhelmed. "You've done good things," he said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "But remember, it's not about recognition. It's about making a difference." Maria sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, it's just, everything feels so big now. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Master Takahashi chuckled softly. "Sometimes, the smallest actions create the biggest waves. That doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of those waves alone. Let the community lift you up, and let yourself rest when you need to." His words reminded her of something important. She didn't have to do everything perfectly or take on every challenge by herself. Empowering others meant trusting them to step up too. With renewed clarity, Maria decided to focus on what truly mattered, helping those around her feel safe and strong. As for Ray and his gang, their story took a different turn. Facing legal consequences forced them to confront the harm they'd caused, not just to Maria, but to countless others over the years. During court-mandated counseling sessions, Ray admitted, albeit reluctantly, that he'd bullied people because he felt powerless himself. Growing up in a broken home, he'd learned early on that aggression was the easiest way to command attention. His friends echoed similar sentiments, revealing cycles of neglect and anger that had shaped their behavior. While some in Willow Creek struggled to forgive them, others saw an opportunity for redemption. A few volunteers from the community, including Maria, began mentoring former offenders, helping them reintegrate into society. It wasn't easy, and progress was slow, but small victories kept everyone hopeful. One day, Ray showed up at the community center where Maria taught her self-defense classes. He lingered near the door, clearly unsure whether he belonged there. When Maria noticed him, she walked over, her expression neutral but open. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ray shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. I wanted to say sorry," he mumbled. "For everything. I know I messed up bad." Maria studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Apologies are a start," she said evenly. "But real change takes time. Are you ready to put in the work?" He swallowed hard, nodding again. "Yeah, I want to make things right." With that, Maria invited him to sit in on the next class, not as a participant but as an observer. Over time, he became a regular attendee, learning alongside others, and slowly rebuilding trust within the community. Seeing him humbled and willing to grow gave Maria hope that even the hardest hearts could soften with effort and understanding. Back at the library, life returned to its peaceful rhythm. Patrons laughed and chatted freely, knowing they were safe. Children raced between shelves, their giggles echoing through the halls. Even Mr. Peterson, the director, seemed lighter these days, often joining Maria for tea breaks and swapping stories about the library's history. One sunny afternoon, as Maria organized books in the reading nook, a familiar voice called out, "Excuse me." Turning around, she saw the young mother from that fateful night, the one with the toddler. She held a plate of cookies in one hand and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. "I wanted to bring you something," the woman said, smiling shyly, "to say thank you again. My son talks about you all the time. He calls you his superhero." Maria laughed, touched by the gesture. "Tell him real superheroes wear librarian glasses," she joked, accepting the gifts. The woman grinned before adding sincerely, "You've changed things here, for everyone." "We owe you so much." Maria shook her head, brushing off the praise. "No, we owe each other. Communities are strongest when we stand together." As the woman left, Maria glanced around the library, taking in the scene before her. The laughter, the quiet rustle of pages turning, the sense of belonging. It was all exactly as it should be. For the first time in months, she felt truly at peace. Standing up to Ray hadn't just been about protecting herself. It had been about reclaiming something precious for everyone. And though the journey hadn't been easy, she knew it had been worth every step. Little did Maria realize, however, that her story was far from over. In standing up for what was right, she had inspired others to do the same. And that spark of courage was spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Months had passed since that stormy night at the library, and Willow Creek felt like a different place altogether. The once quiet town now buzzed with energy, not the chaotic kind, but the kind that comes from people feeling empowered and connected. Maria's act of bravery had ignited something in the community, a spark that refused to fade. It wasn't just about her standing up to Ray anymore. It was about everyone finding their own voice and strength. Maria herself had settled into a new rhythm. Her self-defense classes continued to grow, drawing participants from neighboring towns as well. What started as a small group meeting in the community center's cramped gymnasium eventually moved to a larger space donated by a local business owner who'd been inspired by Maria's story. People of all ages and backgrounds came together under one roof, united by a shared goal to feel safer, stronger, and more confident. Each session began with Maria sharing a lesson, not just about technique, but about mindset. She often reminded her students, "Karate isn't about fighting, it's about respect. Respect for yourself, for others, and for the power you hold." Her words resonated deeply, especially with those who had spent years doubting their ability to stand up for themselves. Parents brought their children, hoping they'd learn skills to navigate life's challenges. Adults joined to overcome fears they'd carried for decades. Even seniors attended, eager to stay active while gaining tools to protect themselves if needed. One evening, after a particularly lively class, an older man approached Maria. His name was Frank, and he'd recently retired from a long career as a school janitor. He shuffled forward, leaning on his cane, and extended a shaky hand. "I never thought I'd step foot in a place like this," he admitted, gesturing to the mats. "But my granddaughter told me I should give it a try. She said you're the reason she stopped being afraid of bullies at school." Maria smiled warmly, touched by his words. "How's she doing?" she asked. Frank's eyes lit up. "She's doing great. She even stood up to her teacher last week when another kid got blamed for something he didn't do. Turns out she's braver than I ever gave her credit for." Maria nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "That's what this is all about," she said softly, "helping people see how strong they already are." The ripple effects of Maria's actions weren't limited to the community center or the library. Across Willow Creek, people began organizing initiatives aimed at fostering kindness and safety. A group of high school students launched a peer mentoring program to support classmates struggling with bullying. Local businesses banded together to fund scholarships for kids interested in martial arts training. Even the police department partnered with Maria to host workshops on conflict resolution and personal safety. What struck Maria most was how these efforts seemed to bring people closer together. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now collaborating on projects, exchanging ideas, and celebrating each other's successes. The fear that had once gripped Willow Creek was slowly giving way to hope, and Maria knew she had played a part in that transformation. Still, she remained humble. When people called her a hero, she'd shake her head and redirect the praise. "This isn't about me," she'd say firmly. "It's about us. All of us working together to make things better." Her modesty only endeared her further to the community. One Saturday morning, during a town-wide cleanup event, someone hung a banner outside the library that read, "Willow Creek stands strong together." Beneath it was a smaller sign, "Thank you, Maria, for showing us the way." Though embarrassed by the attention, Maria couldn't deny the warmth it brought her heart. As time went on, Ray's journey toward redemption became a topic of quiet discussion among residents. While some still harbored resentment, many acknowledged the progress he'd made. Attending counseling sessions and volunteering at the community center had given him a chance to rebuild trust. He worked alongside former victims of bullying, listening to their stories and offering support where he could. It wasn't easy. There were days when old habits threatened to resurface, but he stuck with it, determined to prove he could change. One afternoon, Maria found Ray helping stack chairs after a self-defense class. They hadn't spoken much since his apology months earlier, but she noticed how diligently he worked, his movements careful and deliberate. After finishing, he turned to her hesitantly. "I know I'll never undo what I did," he said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm trying. Really trying." Maria studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That's all anyone can ask for," she replied. "Keep going." Ray's gratitude was evident in his expression. For the first time in years, he looked lighter, as though carrying less weight on his shoulders. Watching him walk away, Maria reflected on how forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to move forward, both individually and collectively. By the end of the year, Willow Creek had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Crime rates dropped, community engagement soared, and the library became busier. than ever. Patrons filled its halls daily, borrowing books, attending events, and simply enjoying the sense of belonging it provided. Even Master Takahashi visited occasionally, sitting quietly in a corner with a cup of tea as he observed the vibrant energy around him. For Maria, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but it was a richer, fuller version of the quiet existence she'd once known. She still shelved books, helped visitors, and sipped tea during breaks. Yet now she did so with the knowledge that she'd made a lasting impact, not just on individuals, but on an entire community. One crisp December evening, as snow began dusting the streets of Willow Creek, Maria locked up the library and paused to take in the scene. The town square glowed with twinkling lights, and laughter drifted from nearby homes preparing for the holidays. Children played tag in the park, their breath forming clouds in the chilly air. Everything felt peaceful and right. Master Takahashi joined her unexpectedly, having stopped by to check on her after hearing about yet another accolade she'd received. "You've done remarkable work," he said, gazing at the town with pride. "But tell me, how does it feel?" Maria thought for a moment, then smiled. "It feels complete," she admitted. "Like everything I've gone through led me here, to this moment, this place, these people." He nodded approvingly. "That's the beauty of resilience. It doesn't just help you survive, it helps you thrive." As they walked back to the dojo together, Maria glanced up at the star-filled sky. She didn't consider herself extraordinary, just someone who had chosen to stand up when the moment demanded it. But in doing so, she'd inspired countless others to do the same, and perhaps that was the greatest gift of all, knowing that courage, once sparked, could light up an entire world.